Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I'm the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine and the host for the Dean's Chat podcast. Once again, I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Joanna Richey. Hi, Joe.
Hey Jeff, how you doing?
I'm fabulous. Hey, thank you for helping give the tour this morning and showing the ankle arthroscopy simulators.
Yeah, I can't help myself. When I see people in the lab, I have to find a way to get in and be like, "You want to play with it? You want to turn it on and see how it runs?"
No, they
Hopefully it
loved
was
it.
good. It was
They
good.
enjoyed it. Thank you. Well, that's a nice segue into our excellent guest today. I'd like to welcome Dr. Patrick Burns to Dean's Chat. Dr. Burns has been a tremendous leader in residency education and surgery in the field of podiatric medicine. Welcome to Dean's Chat.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Dr. Burns, we're pretty informal here on Dean's Chat, and if it's okay with you, let's go first names. Let's go Pat, Joe, and Jeff.
Absolutely. It's fine with me.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you, Pat. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. And after looking at your CV, I don't even know where you find time to do things, but we'll start with a brief bio, and then I'd love to kind of highlight various things as we go through the discussion that you've done in your career. So first and foremost, currently you're working with the West Virginia University system as the residency director of the new program with WVU Medicine, Wheeling Hospital Medicine, Podiatric Surgery Residency Program. You did your undergraduate degree at the University of Pittsburgh in biological sciences, and then went on to do your podiatric medical school at Scholl College in Illinois. Went on to do your surgical residency training at UPMC, that same University of Pittsburgh. I'd love to hear kind of how you decided to go back and what that looked like. And then you continued on as the residency director there for many years before making this new switch. So, welcome to Dean's Chat. I'd love it if you don't mind talking a little bit about what that transition process looked like for you, going from being a resident with UPMC and then kind of how that happened. We've gotten a lot of history on this program from other programs. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, well, thanks guys for having me and letting me kind of promote the new thing too. But yeah, it's been a good history. I'll tell you what, I've had a good uh life with this profession. And certainly as you get out and you talk to prospective students and residents and things, just the great profession that this is and what it's given me. So I did my undergrad training at the University of Pittsburgh, and so then went to Chicago. Um, I'd say during my time there as a student, especially at that time in late '90s and whatnot, and I think schools do this a lot. You get kind of pushed to certain programs and certain things, but there's always good sleepers out there, and I think there are always programs growing, and uh, that's just the way life is, right? There's kind of ups and downs, and I always say you're like one hire away from having a job or not having a job, kind of a thing. But when I was looking at what I wanted to do with residency, there were a couple programs in the Pittsburgh area, and one of which was actually a St. Francis program. So I loved it there. I loved my attendings there. I loved the camaraderie there, the family there. I love the fact that those guys did everything, but just were good people, just quiet. I think when you look at the national scene of things. So so I started at St. Francis, and then within 2 months, the hospital closed. So I've been through quite a bit. My I think watching those guys go through the process of something closing and the changes that happen in healthcare, which we're all undergoing all the time, uh, watching how they handled that, the sort of opportunities that they saw and what they chose, and those are the guys that actually got us into the University of Pittsburgh because there was no one ever there before. So I have to, really give my thanks to my residency director was Clinton Lowry. But those guys getting us into the University of Pittsburgh then really kind of shot me forward. So we had a smaller program, just two a year. I did my program. I stayed in the area. I always knew I wanted to work with residents and educate, and so then I stayed with that program and then kind of started to grow what we did, the meetings we did, the educational things we did, started to have cadaver labs do things. And then I think with some good grace, but also just hard work, I was asked to come to University of Pittsburgh to work. So I was one of those kind of guys. Whenever people are always, how do you find a job? How do you find, what that kind of job? It came to me, but I think that's because of what I was doing and the work I was doing. I think the department saw that. I'm always on time. I'm always early. I'm always there. I'm always, educating. And I think that sort of thing. I just got a call on my ride home one day. Hey, what do you think about coming to work here? And as a young guy in his like late 20s or whatever at the time, meeting with, some pretty big names in orthopedics, that was tough to sit across from the table and not, completely, bend. So I literally told him, I said, listen, I'll come here, but I don't want restrictions, or I'll just work down the street. And they were actually not smart enough at the time, probably, is what they would tell you, to say no to me. They said, okay, let's do that. And I also asked for a teaching title, which was not common at all, 20 whatever years ago. And they said, well, we just bylaw changes. I think we can do that. So I think really, when you look back at it, that was like tip of the spear stuff of not very many people at academic centers, especially a powerhouse like Pitt. And it just opened the doors to having a program where we could, expand and have guys on different services and have guys on services for different months, and 2 level 1 traumas that could take our guys. And so it grew from like 2 a year to 6 a year, and a fellowship. And so for many years, 18 guys in the fellow, and we had some really great times there for sure. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Mm-hmm.
What's the old saying? Fortune favors the bold. Good
Yeah,
job.
yeah. It's crazy. So you guys probably know of Dane Wookich. I mean, he was the foot and ankle orthopod at the time. So Dane was actually the guy who gave me a call on my ride home one day and said, hey, listen, I'm looking for somebody to come here. And he said, everyone I ask around the city says you should, hire this guy. And he's like, even though you're young and whatever, he's like, listen, what do you think? And I said, no, it's perfect timing, because I think I'm ready to, do something like that. So, yeah, I think, Dane noticed, coming to meetings that, I was always there, always on time. When the guys were presenting cases, a lot of times they were kind of my cases. And I think that I was only doing some of those cases because I had residents. I think that's one of these things of like, maybe I wouldn't do it, but you got a guy in your back ear like, hey, let's try this, or hey, let's, what do you think about doing that? And especially early on with like external fixers and things that were relatively new to us, or to a majority of us at the time. I was like, okay, yeah, let's give it a try, or let's do it. And I think Dane saw that stuff and saw me leading them, and but also, like I said, I mean, as a military man, I think he noticed being there, being on time, being, whatever. I still wear a tie and a shirt, and, don't, I think those are things sometimes in that generation are noticed, and versus like my colleagues that are, 5 or 10 minutes late every meeting, or, kind of frumpy, whatever. I don't know. And it's not that they're not great. It's just that that's one of those things of like, that's why I got the call. I don't think it was much else. So
There's all kinds of things to talk about there. I so agree with you. You know, I, you only have one chance to make a first impression, right? And so that's
yeah,
part of it. But also, I heard another interview with you when you were on with Jeff Dykes, and you
yes,
had said something that Joe and I tell students all the time: just give a little bit extra, give a few percent extra. And I've actually quantified it to 3% extra, because that's 20 minutes out of a 10-hour day, and you'll stand out. And
yeah.
I got that sense, when you were doing the interview with Jeff, that has been kind of a hallmark in your career.
I think so, because I think as a guy who kind of wanted to be at the top of the pile, but I think also, especially at early, being in that department and just knowing that someone is watching. And I think that's true of most of us everywhere, but that's a big program, one of the largest orthopedic programs in the country. And plus we're doing these radiology rounds, and we're doing things with these guys. Plus I'd go to M&M Orthopedics, and I would go to their grand rounds. And I just knew that, okay, a screw, that's 6 millimeters too long, is that going to cause a problem? Probably not, but it doesn't look great sometimes. So I think that's where I got into that, being repetitive so that you can be consistent. Like I'm not one that likes to have, if I have 4 first MPJ fusions on, I'm not going to use 4 companies because I want a steak dinner. I just want to do things well, and I want to have some reproducibility. And if I can't reproduce it, then I can't learn from that. If I'm having problems, then I can't learn if I have 3 different screws that I've been trying. And there's a need for it. There's a use for that kind of thing. But it sometimes, we obviously make things a little bit too difficult. But yeah, I think orthopedically, most things are about 80% success rate. You just need to be a little bit better. And that's what brings people to you. That's what brings, more clients and more, surgeries and more whatevers. And so that's what I tell the guys all the time is you just need to be that much better than the guy down the street. And that's really makes the difference there, because anybody who does an okay job is always going to, there's this kind of level of orthopedics where pretty much everything hits the same level. You just need to be that little bit better. I won't tell you what I used to actually tell people.
No, we're interested. We want to know.
Although I love my buddies from across the river there at West Penn, but I would always say, just have to be just few percent better than West Penn.
There you go.
That's it.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you got to have a bar. You got to have someone.
That's right. Yep. Just got to be a few percent better than those guys, and that's what I tell them all the time. I got actually one of my residents and fellows works for them over there. I know, Saltrick and Katz well, and those guys are super good guys. But that's what I always tell them. Just a little bit better than the West Penn guys.
Well, friendly
And
competition.
That's right.
to your point, it doesn't necessarily have to always be technically better. It can be showing up on time, being well put together, saying something that is meaningful rather than just speaking to talk. And so if you don't mind talking a little bit too about some of the relationship building, I have to tell a little story because it's before I had even met you, Pat. I was talking to an orthopedic traumatologist, and we were looking to kind of, talking about different faculty that would be good for incorporating the AO. And she was like, we had a list of people and you were on it. And she's like, oh man, Pat Burns, that guy is outstanding. And this is an orthopedic traumatologist that was no longer working with you, and she was in a totally different part of the country. But again, I think it speaks volumes to what you were speaking of in terms of how we represent ourselves and how we show up to the table matters. Can you talk a little bit about that in your career, kind of how relationship building has impacted you?
Yeah, for sure. I've been blessed with having some good relationships with people I think that matter, and not just my sort of chairman and things, but I mean, I'll just tell you another little story of getting to the hospital every day at about 5:15 or so, and I park it in the same spot every day because I do everything the same. I tell the guys, and they'll probably laugh if anybody ever listens to this. I get up at the same time. I feed my cats at the same time. I do everything exactly the same every day. So if you have something going on, or I had a late night, or or my body already knows what to do, and I go into a sort of default sort of thing. I do it all the time. I can tell you one other guy was the CEO of our hospital, and I'd see him many, many mornings in the garage. And so Mike Grace at the time was our CEO at Mercy Hospital at Pitt, and that's something that I think he clearly noticed too. And so whenever I need something, he'd say, "Hey, hey, let's have a meeting." I met with our CEO very often, and he'd say, "Hey, listen, let's meet at whatever. I know you're here." Like he knows I'm there, so he would get there as well. His meetings don't start till 7, 8, whatever, but he knows I'm there at 5. Hey, let's meet at 6. I know you're here. And having regular meetings with the CEO, so that he just has a good sort of finger on the pulse of what's going on with the program. What kind of problems we have, what do we need, what we don't need. I mean, that's the kind of thing that's happened to me several times in my life, like little things like that. And yeah, Mike definitely noticed me being there on time, and all the guys in all the doctors in the lounge, they knew I was there all the time because my car's in the same spot all the time, so yeah, so it's I think for me there's always been an important part of being consistent. I am a very anxious person, so I don't need an alarm. I get up, I'm nervous I'm going to miss something. Actually alarm scares me, so it gives me a little heart attack. So I wake up before it, turn it off. But not that I don't turn it on in case there's some weird event, but I'm a creature of habit for sure. I do the same thing And so I carry that stuff into talking to patients. I do the same thing. All the guys will again, anybody listening to this will say anytime they spend time with me, I wash my hands every time. I take 3 towels. I wipe that. I wipe the sink. I do the same thing every time with every patient, I say similar things, for things. We all do that. We all have habits and things that we say, but, then there come out these like, sort of, Burns-isms and things that guys, come back later. But it is fun to like talk to residents later down the road. And they're like, I find myself saying some of the things you say and stuff. I mean, I'm sure we all have that, but I am definitely a creature of habit. And again, I think that's the thing about, me from a learning standpoint is I've learned from, like, I know certain words not to say to a patient because I've been, set in my place with like, don't say that, or you see that now they have focused on that word that you said. So, sometimes things like amputation, now they're stuck on that. And you can talk for the next 5 minutes and they haven't heard another single thing because you said you're going to amputate something. So sometimes I'll just say, listen, it's better not to have that toe, better not to have that leg. It's just, versus amputation or something. But it's just like weird little things like that sometimes that you kind of realize that, boy, I just lost that patient because I said something that I shouldn't. And so then you kind of, pick up on that. So yeah, I've always been a creature of habit. I think it's helped me quite a bit. I do same thing, and it's kind of weird. I always think like everything's just a few years. But then I'll see, somebody from, 12 years ago I did surgery on, and it looks exactly like I just did it yesterday. Like it's the same, way I do it. It's the same set of screws, the same technique. It's like, oh, geez, I guess I have been doing that for a while. That same way. But yeah, I think it's important. I think for what we do, it's important. And like I said, I think there's a room for, we need to learn and we need to grow, but there's also times where, we need some consistency.
That's a
Consistency is king, as they say, or queen, if you will.
Yeah.
That's interesting you mentioned that. I've never used an alarm clock in my life. I have this internal clock. I'm just up every morning early, and poor Joe and the faculty get emails at 5 a.m. and
Yeah.
just kind of the way it is. I don't know. It's kind of strange. There's got to be some
Yeah.
science behind it.
I definitely get, I'll get some emails back. Boy, you were up early, but yeah, and I always find I have things to do. So I always got to the hospital at the exact same time. So there's no sense fighting traffic. I can just get down there. I got to do stuff anyway. So if I didn't have, 13, 15 patients to see, if you only have, you still have things to do, especially as a residency director. I mean, I had no administrative time, zero. They would not give me administrative time. So not only are you doing 15,000 reviews a year, you're also managing 18 residents and a fellow with all the PRR stuff that goes with it. They all have monthly evals and quarterly evals and end of year evals. And there's always something that can be done. I can read something. I don't read really, but some people do. I mean, there's always something that can be done, for sure.
maybe put together the lengthy amount of lectures that you've given across the country every single year. There's at least a small handful every single year that you have been involved in. So that's kind of a nice segue, perhaps, into some of the other things that you've really kind of shown in your career. You had the opportunity to go to Russia and do a fellowship in external fixation, and you've lectured on this around the country. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like and how that's impacted your career?
Well, yeah, again, I don't know how, but I think, at the time when I was sort of towards my last, year or two, whatever residency, but then as I first got out, it started to become a little bit more of a thing where people were starting to do some external fixation. You had some real, kind of pioneers like Laporta and, George Vito and, you know, Schubert. And I mean, those were guys who, we would always see at some of the meetings. But as a young guy, I kind of got involved with uh, teaching with them, which was really, quite an honor. And I've had the luck of being with a bunch of them over the years. And I've definitely told a couple guys, like, quietly, you guys mentored me, just, didn't realize it. But as a young guy sitting with all these older guys, I just would sit and listen. But as part of that, I would say that at that time, if you did not go to Russia, you were not lecturing on it. You were not talking. You were not doing it. It was a rite of passage. It was 100%. If you didn't go, people weren't talking to you about it, and you weren't doing it. So I was lucky enough to be doing some of those things, and picked up kind of some, help from one of the companies. It was like, okay, this guy's doing, fixators and whatnot. And so, they asked me to go to Russia and do it. And I was like, yeah, I got to go, spend some time over there, because otherwise getting on the lecture circuit with them was impossible. And at the time, FACFAS had, a couple courses a year. They had some beginner courses. They had advanced courses. You had, and a lot of companies don't do it as much anymore. And I get it, because there's a lot of companies, and, at the time, it was one company, and there weren't many. Now there's so many. If you learn one, then you go use somebody else's stuff. But, that's the way any fixation is. But at any rate, going to Russia was a lot of fun, for sure. That is a different environment. It's in the middle of Siberia. So you got to take a plane to Moscow, then you go to, then you take another little plane, then you take a bus. But it was kind of interesting in that, like, every day you got there and you got a white coat. So you walked in, they give you a white coat so that they know you have something kind of clean on or whatever. We would have surgery, and you did one. So from 8 to like 11, didn't matter what it was. It could be, a pilon. It could be a little kid with a club foot. It could be, I saw bunions done that way. I mean, it's craziness. They all seem to take the exact same amount of time. Everyone was done around 11:30, and then it was lunchtime. So, and they had these 4 rooms, and you could just walk in and out of them. Like if you were just there kind of watching, no C-arm, no nothing like that. I mean, we have a great little talk about it. It's kind of fun, but the afternoon was really kind of interesting, because, they knew for, these weeks that there were guys coming to do, lower extremity. And so they kept people there waiting for us. And so they would bring in like surgeries for tomorrow and let them walk. You get to take a look at them, get to evaluate and examine whatever. Then they would also bring in some people from, like, last week or last month or something. And then whatever surgeries you did, you would have to then, present that to the panel. And they had interpreters and things there. So you'd have to have the x-rays up, explain what you did, why you did. And then there's always didactics in the afternoon after that too. But it was really, really kind of an interesting, place. But, they would keep people there. They would adjust the fixators there. They would keep people there for months. I mean, obviously we don't really do that. They had adjustment clinics where they brought people down, look at x-rays, kind of make some adjustments. And they also had a completely separate infection hospital. So that didn't cross over. Like the physicians over there don't go over here. And, so all these guys, of course, would say, well, we never get any infections. But then you're over in the infection hospital, like, well, of course they don't, because we're getting them and they don't see it. So, but it's kind of an interesting kind of thought to have everything, kept separate. But yeah, I saw just about everything there. Like I said, bunion problems, clubfoot problems, limb lengthenings, all kinds of things. But I would say that, going there knowing how to do was important, because they're not there to teach you. They're there to show you some techniques and show you some things that you can do. And, but they're not there to show you righty tighty, lefty loosey, stuff like that. So if you don't know kind of that stuff, it wasn't for the beginner. It was for someone who's kind of trying to glean some things from it. But I tell you, I went and I learned, and I scrubbed every single thing I could. I would, the first day or two, you're with a small group and everyone's fighting. They all want to do it. They all want to do it. Everyone wants to do it. And then after a couple of days, nobody wants to do it, because they're all there to party or have a good time or go have some vodka or do whatever. I scrub every time, all the time, learn as much as I possibly could if I'm going over there to do it. And, it was a good experience for me. But like I said, I think the biggest thing is that it opened up the door for me to then work with these guys, and then as a young guy, just listening and watching, and a lot of what I've, a lot of what I learned, and a lot of what I pass on are, things from those guys, for sure.
I think that's a really neat kind of talking point too, this idea that this particular fellowship was much more a finessing of skill than it was a teaching of a skill. And having that opportunity to have pre-op and post-op interactions, even if they weren't necessarily yours, to see some of that continuity again, and it may be a different capacity in a different way, the value that brings to that teaching environment. Now you are the co-chair for the annual International External Fixation Symposium. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's been a thing, that's, just the last couple of years moved, but that's with Tomas Sagonis in San Antonio. He'd been in University of Texas, San Antonio for many years, and Tom was my chief. He was a year above me. So he has a pretty interesting kind of career path as well, and he knows a lot of international guys. So that conference is one of the few that's still around that does XFix. But it's really kind of fun because there are international guys. Some of them you have a hard time understanding. Some of them are, just reading from a little piece of paper and just like they'll read the commas and, pause for effect. Like but it is pretty neat to see guys from other parts of the world. There's Greece, Turkey, Romania, all kinds of places. And so getting to, meeting guys, see some different things. Sometimes they think we're just absolutely crazy. But that course is, usually a couple of days, but there's an entire day that's all cadaver. And there's a lot of plastics components to it because Tom does a lot of that. But then there's also sort of, 3 or 4 different fixators. A lot of times I'll do intramedullary nail with that as well because Tom doesn't do that as much, but he always, people are always asking about it. But it is really one of the few, and especially as like a cadaver course and things that, like I said before, we don't see that as much. I mean, they used to be, a little bit more common. FACFAS used to have their own, and they don't anymore. I do think, like AO, as you know, I think that there is still a need for some of that. I think, it has grown. There are lots of people that do it. You don't see anybody who goes to Russia anymore. You don't see any of that stuff. I mean, I had my last couple residents who went probably, 5-6 years ago, something. And it's just, they have to kind of do it on your own. There's no groups that go anymore. So it's a little bit more, you definitely can't go now. But I just think that although stuff is shown, taught, whatever, there's still basics that people, kind of miss and skip over. And I mean, geez, we see that with internal fixation like immensely. That has been completely forgotten and not taught. But external fixation is like that too. I mean, I think there are some good, basic principles that can be taught at courses that we just don't really, see as much anymore. We did one at ACFAS last year as a pre-conference, and I think it had some pretty good, reviews and things. So I think there's still a need for some of that for sure. Although you do have some good people out there doing things, it's just not as prevalent, course wise.
We've had some other guests on that have talked a little bit about the role that industry has to play in how we educate. And I agree, it's a challenging situation because we want to support opportunities for residents to engage in learning opportunities and to try to do that as much as we can from a bias-free perspective. What are your thoughts on, I know you've had lots of different teaching experiences across all different types of events. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, it's that little double-edged sword of like we need them, we need them for our conferences and things, and yeah, for teaching, as a residency director, having someone bring, some sawbones and bring, some screws or bring, fixation, it's important. I think, but that's one thing versus what you see sometimes. I mean, I've had some partners that I'm not kidding, 3, 4, 5, 6, reps standing outside their room, waiting for one screw or one whatever or something. I think I've always been better at, because I like consistency. I find, I find a company that has a lot. I don't want to have to jump around a lot. But you also need to have a rep that's good. I mean, you can have a quality product, but if you have a rep that's no good, that also sometimes isn't great. So I've been lucky enough to have some pretty good reps and a couple companies. But there definitely are issues with like disruptive devices, and I've definitely given talks on this. This is something I learned from my time at Pitt, like. In any time you can kind of assimilate yourself into what's going on. I learned how to do my, grand rounds that way, learned how to present M&M stuff that way. And I certainly learned a lot of things that, I can extrapolate. And, the talk on the disruptive devices was kind of, that was like, geez, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And we see it, right? I mean, you have something that we all do relatively well. and then something else comes and blows up the market. It costs 5 times as much, but you don't really get, what do you really get out of it? So I think as a profession, some of these things, we're not getting much out of it because you still have, a complication rate, you still have a non-union rate. I don't care what they say about anything, yet it costs more. But from a company standpoint, you get it though too, because the idea with disruptive devices is that they're trying to gather more, you know, width there. So they're trying to find a way to get this doctor who doesn't do it to be able to do it. It's not really for me to be able to do it as much as it's how do I get these other guys to be able to do it type of thing. But that really I have a little bit of a problem with, because we all struggle with healthcare. We all struggle with we can't get this done because it costs too much money or something. And I think like the what consultants get for some of this stuff is probably not, that's a little crazy. I mean, I think most of us do okay, and generally aren't starving to death. And I don't know if it sets a great example if I'm bouncing around from company to company. I mean, the things that really get me is like, I'll go to a conference and it's the fifth different allograft I've heard from the same physician, but every year this is the one that's actually worked. Well, clearly none of them work, because every year you're talking about a different one. So none of them do anything, that's kind of a little different, I think, than a guy who's actually working, designing, coming up with ideas of, listen, I've done this a bunch of times and this is failing. So let's try to, I have a better idea for a plate or a something. I mean, there's definitely, there's a give and a take there, but I think, unfortunately, like most things, money is a driving force for things. But I definitely have lost a little bit of, not respect, but whatever, for certain, whenever you see certain things like, boy, that's like the 10th company, or whenever somebody gets up and they have a list like this long of, I can only say one of the great things about having like big university stuff is that generally, a lot of that stuff's not really, a lot of that's frowned upon in big systems. Like when you're out on your own or you're in a small group, nobody cares, nobody looks at you. When you have a big system, there's typically someone's looking at conflict of interest, things like that. So it kind of keeps you in check a little bit. But it's also frustrating because then you see guys out there talking, you're like, oh my gosh, there's just no way. Like I know guys who do way more and way better and way whatever, but it's just kind of, what can you do? It's or guys, they come to me and say, listen, we'd love for you to talk or do something on this, but I can't really do it because I can't do it because of conflict of interest. So
Yeah.
it's definitely double-edged sword that we need, and we need to keep trying to learn new things, whatever. But at the same time, I think, and then you see some good studies out, like, there's one from, Texas, where the guys look at like, midfoot beaming stuff, and they find that really, quite honestly, a cannulated screw works just as well. And, probably costs a quarter of what some of these other, fancy things cost. And, yeah, I use a femoral nail most of the time that costs probably a third of what most of these other nails cost, and it works and I can get that for less than some of these Lapidus systems that you see. It's craziness. But one of the other things with one of the companies I was talking to him about, like, what we need to do is take your fixator and change it, and take your nail and change it, and then but then they said, well, we're going to either do that or we're going to buy this company that has like staples and stuff. So I'm like, well, if you do that, I can't really help. That's not, and so that's what they ended up doing. But I get it. I always tell them, like, from a numbers standpoint, like, you have a guy who's doing something, there's only a couple guys to whatever, but then you have this, and you're gonna have 1,000 guys doing it. Man, it's just numbers, it's all bean counter stuff. But I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough little double-edged sword there to try to figure out.
Yeah. Jeff, your thoughts?
Oh, I agree. I think it's a challenge. And my brain went to MIS surgery, Pat, because if you were doing cases very similar for year after year or decade into the next decade, and then the MIS came along, I see some of those films put up on LinkedIn or some of our colleagues, and that the bone on bone, the interface, the compression, the typical internal fixation techniques we've used over the years don't seem to apply anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we lose sight of some of that stuff. Um, yeah, I have a lot of problems with things that within 1 year already have a complication uh classification. There's, stage, type 1, type 2, type 3 blown out. I mean, that's not good whenever you're like a year into this and you already have a complication classification scheme. I also think as a guy who takes care of a lot of tertiary and quaternary things down the road, that's the kind of stuff that makes it difficult. And now I know somebody who is in the process of working with a company to make a first MPJ fusion plate for failures of this. So now we're like, okay, well, now you're making like a whole nother, disruptive device idea. Like you got to do something with these ridiculous shapes, and the screws are tough, and they're going to be tough to get out. Those also they're not cheap. I have a lot of problems with it, quite honestly. But again, whenever and you guys know because you're parts of all this stuff, when you're parts of like committees and you're doing like annual conferences, you can't not, because it's just like overtaken thing. So if you have a conference now without MIS, track, people swear at you and yell at you for not having an MIS track. But so there's roles for everything, I guess. And I guess if you're, if you are trained well and the sort of mechanics of and the biology of, but again, this is like exactly the definition of a disruptive device. Take a guy who doesn't know how to do a bunion and tell him how easy it's going to be and how you can take any IM and push it over, and you can use this screw. They can't put a screw whenever they can see it, let alone now putting a screw that long from way down here to way over there in an unstable. You're just looking for trouble. You're just asking for trouble. So there are good people that do it. There are, there's a role for it, but it's exactly the disruptive device kind of idea that I was kind of talking about that we struggle with.
And I think that's
bring it up.
also what makes it so interesting is this idea that how do we continue to promote innovation, promote the advancement of a profession in terms of technology, equipment, whatever, smaller incisions, but still keep it principle-based, focused on minimizing complications. Like there is no perfect system here, right? And it is difficult to try to manage all of those things and all of those perspectives and opinions. And I don't think anyone has the answer to how do we do this, but it's been an interesting topic that I've been seeing kind of recur through a couple different social media things. And we want to partner with our industry support to facilitate resident education and student education. But how do we also prevent all the bias that can come? And to your point, how do you start to piece out what's real, right? Like you have somebody that's saying the same thing for 6 different companies. I'm not really sure I can believe you when you say that this is the only product that works. So it's definitely an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's a tough one. This we'll keep doing it, but I guess that's part of it. So there's always there's a myriad of new things every year, and one or two of them are probably not great, but then there are some good ideas that come out, and so yeah, it's kind of sifting through that. And I think some of it's just I'm a little older, so I'm probably going to have some biases based on that. I've done things for years a certain way, and there's always that kind of bias. I'm generally a relatively opinionated guy myself, so that's also part of it. Yeah, it's an interesting thing for sure. That this won't be the last disruptive thing. They tried MIS a long time ago.
Oh yeah.
And it went away. This seems to have a little better thing. I used to have a guy tell me, like, whenever the internal or whenever the like syndesmotic, like that kind of the flexible fixation and the whatever, and then people were doing like bunion with that kind of fixation and whatever. I had an older guy, I remember when I was at Residency, he's like, Pat, this isn't new. He's like, we used to just take some number 2 Prolene, and we would just tie the first and second metatarsal head together and just tie a big knot and pull them. He's like, that's what we used to call that, the rope-a-dope. He's like, this isn't new. We've been doing that for a long time. I'm like, okay, well, yeah. So things go through cycles, I guess, but it is better than tying a number 2 Prolene around stuff and having a huge knot, I guess. So I guess as technology improves, we have the ability to revisit some of these ideas. So I mean, yeah, there's a need, and there are good guys who do a good job. There's no doubt. And it's just trying to make sure that we have, you know, residents and young physicians coming out that have the skill to understand, what they're doing, why they're doing it, understand, C-arm and fluoro and, how those things can, be a little misleading at times, or how do you get the image that you need? And, that's all stuff that, really comes from hands-on residency training of, we've all been fooled by a C-arm before or something. And, it takes a little bit of, a little bit of learning there, but yeah, so I guess, with better technology comes the ability to revisit some of these things.
And I think to your point also that you had mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, that idea of reproducibility, like we need to finesse it better, that we can make it more predictable, make it more reproducible, more reliable, consistently, find those little quirks that we need to identify so that people can avoid these pitfalls. And so one of the areas that people can find opportunities for that is things like mentorship, fellowships. Can you talk about some of the mentors in your life? If we shift gears a little bit into mentorship, who are some of
Yeah.
the?
Yeah. I like I said before, I think, Clint Lowry was my director and then stayed on as assistant director for forever. Actually still assistant director there. Um, I mean, that he was definitely like a father figure to me. And, these are the kind of people, and I'm sure lots of programs are like it, but I mean, it comes to be this time of year and you have people that, are away from home, or, they're how many states away, or, they're going to be on call. So they can't, and this is the kind of guy that like has people over for Thanksgiving and, that kind of thing, but also just, daily interactions, I think, are just as important, just the sort of friendship daily, not just, in the office, in the OR, talking about other things, not just always work, and really just getting to know people, and getting to really know kind of who they are and, where they kind of came from, things like that. So Clint was definitely, and has been, I mean, I still talk to him. Richard Gale, who's an orthopedic surgeon I worked with as a resident, he was a big part of our program for many years. He definitely was a mentor for me, and as a resident, doing just everything with that guy. He was a general orthopod who, back in the day before so much specialization, he was one of the few guys, one of the first guys to really learn arthroscopy. Believe it or not, when he came back to Pittsburgh area, everyone thought he was crazy. In the 70s and 80s, that was, and now, knee arthroscopy is number one orthopedic surgery in the country. So that guy, though, spending time with him and doing, a bone's a bone, it's whatever, but just, seeing him take care of people on a daily basis and take care of all these things. But also after, and I got out as a young practitioner, still as a mentor. And he would, he always came to our educational things. He always talked to me. And whenever I first did total ankle, so the first total ankle, the agility, they only trained like 8 people a year. And so in order to go and be trained, one of the criteria was to have your chief of surgery write a letter saying you would be able to do this, because otherwise, why are they going to train you? And Dr. Gale was our chief of surgery, and he, wrote the letter. So I, went as a young guy and did the agility course and did all this stuff. And I just remember like years later, having like, a couple other little battles about some things, and just saying like, why would you do that kind of stuff, or, be nice or whatever. He's like, well, listen, why wouldn't I? He's like, I know you, I've seen you, I see what you can do. He's like, why would I not, help you? And that's just like, it's just not common. I definitely had guys in my career who could see all that and still hold you back, for sure. So to this day, I have a little shadow box of his clinic coat and stuff in my office. So yeah, he was a good mentor to me. So, and I think that other people though were like I said before, like, quiet mentors. So guys like Laporta stuff. And like I said, I've thanked him on the side, just, a couple of years ago at a conference, and was like, listen, I just want you to know, as a young guy, and D Domenico was another one. I, did that too. There are a lot of guys like that as a young guy sitting around a table. And Dane Wilkich was definitely a mentor to me too. I mean, we worked together as partners for now 14 years, something like that, and produced a lot of good people at the University of Pittsburgh. And everyone has their issues and their problems, but I still learned from the guy, and I still could see his way of you know managing a room, or you know dealing with administration. I mean, quite honestly, I probably learned a lot from Dane that way, because he, as the chair of our department, he shouldered a lot of headache that after he left was kind of thrown probably more on me. So I mean, I even if you maybe don't 100% get along with somebody, it doesn't mean they're not still a mentor and you're not still learning from them, for sure. So I mean, those are definitely big. And then my last chief of surgery at Mercy, Skip Sell, he was a good mentor to me. Fighting a couple little battles there. I just remember, moving, the university moved hospitals for us, and we had to shift over to a different facility, and you move over and you're like, geez, I've been doing this over here for 9 years. And then I come over here and all of a sudden they're like, well, you can't do that. So I remember sitting with Skip, and he's like, listen, they said you can't do it, but that doesn't mean that has to be you can ask for a meeting, and, it doesn't have to be no. So all of a sudden I was like, okay, you can't do a total ankle, or you can't do, I'm like, well, I've been doing it over here for years. So why all of a sudden moving hospitals? So he's like, listen, you don't have to say no. I said, well, that's what I want then. I want a meeting. I want a meeting with guys face to face to sit across the table from me and tell me why I can't do something. And again, I mean, that stuff is not easy as a younger guy, surrounded by some older, well-known people, and it's kind of tough. But then you sit there and you do it, and the next thing you know, everything's like, oh, I don't know why. Yeah, sure. Well, why not? So yeah, I've had some good people in my life, for sure, that have helped me kind of weather a lot of difficult times, and hopefully I've been mentoring some people the same way.
That's interesting because it's kind of a life lesson there. No today does not mean no tomorrow,
Yeah.
in many ways. May I jump in, Joe? I wanted to ask Pat about leadership styles. Such a different skill set being a resident, being a residency, coming in and seeing patients. But then when you start overseeing 18 people and their schedules and kind of their lives, what was your leadership style and how has it evolved over time?
I don't know what my leadership style is. I guess I think I it's interesting. One of the guys I worked with, so I was in private practice for just over a year or so before I joined the university. And I remember, like, the guy I worked with was like, don't like be friends with like the staff and the whatever. And it's like, it's a business, it's a, you know, thing. And no one, people won't respect you if you're like a friend. Uh, I don't know. I couldn't really do that. Like, I don't know. So I think, just, being kind of friendly with everyone and kind of getting to know people. And, if you're walking around an office and you don't know somebody's name, it's not great. So getting to know people. And I think that, like I said, when it goes back to things like my, residency director, it was definitely like a family. Like, you worked together, but that was kind of just the side part of it. Like, we just had fun together. We liked being together. I spent, I mean, just countless hours with all these guys, getting there at whatever time and not leaving until 8. And it's every day. I don't have kids, so it's easier for me. And I would never for years, really take off time, because I always felt bad if I take off a week or two, that resident, that's a week or two that they don't have with me. So I always kind of felt bad, especially early on, as we, had less faculty doing stuff. I mean, as the years went by, we have more and more, and you don't feel so bad because you have 7, 8, 9 guys who are really doing things. But it just always kind of felt bad. I just love spending time with them. I love just getting to know the residents. I love getting to know their sort of families and their histories, and everyone's got their own little paths to how they get to where they're going, and I think being sort of friendly like that, it helps. I think it helps me a little bit, where people aren't, maybe so, intimidated or something. I'm not generally a very mean person, believe it or not. I don't really yell too often. If I do, there's definitely a problem. My wife always says you're way nicer to the residents than you ever are to me. she says that all the time. But I don't know. I think I try to instill in them based on what I do. So I'm always the first one here. And I would hope that that stuff rubs off on it and they see that. Like I don't shy away from like I'm here first and I can start taking a dressing off of a patient. I just did it this morning, and I was probably a couple minutes early, so I can't yell at the fellow for being not being there quite yet because I never really told her I was going to come 5 minutes early. But I'm not going to sit there and wait. I can do things. I put casts on. I still to this day put cast. There is really nothing that's not like below you kind of the day of throwing your gloves on the floor and walking out of a room. That's over. And that's not the way to do things, and that's not how you get. I worked with some attendings like that, and in the OR nobody likes them, and so they don't help them, and they don't want to stay extra, and they don't want to stay after, and they don't want to it'd be like, oh God, not this guy. But for me it'd be like, hey, because it's you, I'll stay and finish his case or whatever. But I think a lot of it's just kind of having good sort of morals and principles, and I'll get on the floor and pick something up. I get there on time early. I still do all my own notes. I don't rely on other notes. I'll pick up the phone and call a patient if I get a message. I still do all that stuff, and I think that's this sort of idea of like, well, I'm this guy now, and so I don't do that, and I don't, call anyway. It's just easier just to get it done, quite honestly. I mean, I think we all want to go home at the end of the day. And, if it saves an extra 30, 40 minutes, then we all get to go home. I still move my patients on the table all the time. And I can't tell you, every single anesthesiologist and CRNA cannot, in moving to a new system, it's just, they're just completely flabbergasted. You put on a tourniquet, you get things ready, you move the patient, it's just crazy. It's just and I can't get over the fact that still in this time that people can sit in the lounge and bitch and complain about turnovers or whatever's, but they're just sitting there.
Right.
I mean, as much as I can help, I mean, I literally picked up a mop one time to get yelled at. So there are some rules as to what you can't do. But I don't need to leave a huge mess for them. I can help move a patient. I can take a gurney down the hall as so the nurse can stay in the room. I got to go to the PACU anyway, so might as well. I mean, there's not like things that are above you, even though I'm 50 at this point and I've done a lot of things. I still, I like doing it, quite honestly. I like, helping, and I think that's it's a sense of helping that probably, so I hope, like, learning wise, those guys see that stuff as much as they see, the percentages of something, or we talk about a journal or something. I'm hoping that they become good people, I think.
I can see where Dr. Lowry's influence probably expanded to a lot of lives, because Dr. Lowry still comes to our residency fair, and I talk to him, and his wife's here, and just what a great guy. And I can see him. We all have part of our training and our mentors in us, so I could certainly see him having an influence on you.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Clinton, Deborah. Yeah, they are good people, and they keep that. They're definitely the mother and father of that program for sure. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Joe, you want to hit on a couple other topics, or?
The last one is right in line with what we're talking about. Some of the common themes we've seen, Jeff, is kind of this idea, when you're working with people, kind of around emotional intelligence. What have you seen, Dr. Burns, in terms of how successful you have a new resident that you're working with? What are some of the key identifiers that start to separate good from excellent?
I think what I've always, maybe I'm just basing it on myself, but I think those things, the things of like, there are people who understand uh, what's going to be needed and don't have to be told. And some people understand that a little quicker. So, I mean, very simple things of, making somebody NPO, so we don't have to really think about it, or, someone, called ahead for, something on the floor, like, I don't know, a wound vac or whatever. There are some people who really get that part of it, where they kind of thinking, the next day or so, or whatever. I've had some good people that they'll send me some things about, the cases the next day, and they've already been thinking about it, and they've already hey, I did this, or I called ahead for this, or something. Because you definitely get some that don't, and they do a good job of other things, but maybe they're not really thinking ahead. And I think the other part is some residents and fellows start to understand, like, what it's going to be like when they're on the other side. It can be tough whenever because I remember as a resident, I don't think I probably did, but you don't really care. I don't even know if I wore a watch. Who really cares if you're doing a surgery at 8 o'clock in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, or like, you don't really care, because what else are you going to do? And then when you're done, you go home. But there are a lot of pressures that we get that the residents sometimes aren't really understanding. So especially nowadays, right? So like, nobody wants to stay overtime, but this goes back to my whole efficiency thing of, they're so you talked about the Wilsons before. I can tell you that we used to have something called Tommy time, which was, he's a little bit slower. And so, one time we talked about, you know, speeding up a little bit, but sometimes people equate speed with sloppy. So efficiency is definitely a better term. So again, I've learned over the years of saying things to not just patients, but like, listen, speed up. Because then then they're just that. So you can be efficient, in the way that you do things. And so if you have 5 cases and you save 20 minutes, I'm not good at math, but that's 100 minutes. So you could either A, be home earlier, or B, you're starting a case at 1:30 and not 3. And so sometimes little things like that, from my standpoint, kind of like, okay, well, we need to get going, because we all know what starts happening. 2, 3, that OR is closing, that OR is closing, that OR, and you're trying to get things done. And so they don't understand sometimes the stress that we're under, where we have, they can't stay, they can't, keep a team, they can't whatever, and you're trying to get going, but you're also trying to teach and whatever. So there's definitely efficiency of things, when people are putting, doing suture, doing whatever, or, every screw is like one little, no, you can get, you can move quicker, than that. And that doesn't change things. Or, they put a stitch and we all see them like, oh, they pull it like it's real slow. No, you gather, you can gather stuff. And if you multiply that, and when it comes back to external fixators, there's definitely an efficiency that I have with those guys with that thing. Because if it takes you 3 minutes to bend a wire, because you see people are bending around, they're all twisting around, like, just, getting a way to do it that's efficient. Because when you multiply it over 20, that's 25 minutes of you goofing around whenever you could have done it neater. So I think, those are things I think I see sometimes with certain people, that they're kind of picking up on that stuff, and they're understanding, the efficiency of things, and, kind of the sequela of, those kinds of actions, I think.
I like it. Pat, we're kind of running low on time, but perhaps down the road you come back and join us. I want to talk more about your residency, about what you like in residence, about clerks, about what it's like to open a new program with 2020 hindsight from having another program. If you'd be willing to do that, Joe and I would love to have you back on
Yeah,
Dean's
for
Chat.
sure. I got all kinds of fun stories and times. And, starting a program has not been as easy, especially for a guy who's, done it for so many years. There's definitely some hoops. It took over a year to get
Oh,
that
for
thing
sure.
approved. Yeah, yep.
You know, funny story. One time, Dr. Bill Todd and Dr. Terry Albright at Scholl called me and they said, "Hey, Jeff, you want to start a residency program? It's easy." And I said, famous last words. So I said, "Yeah, I'm interested." And they said, "Well, if you do, we'll give you residency Genesis funds to do it." So
Yeah.
I took it hook, line, and sinker. And I can tell you firsthand that there's nothing easy about starting a residency program.
Yeah. Yeah. 20, whatever years ago, when I, took over and was growing that program, I would say that it also obviously was easier. We had less paperwork, we had less things, we had less whatever. And I mean, I've been blessed with having good coordinators who understand, not just, education, but podiatry. And that, we're obviously a little bit different when it comes to GME and ACGME. And the amount of paperwork and stuff that we've gotten over the last 7-8 years is out of control. But I get why. I mean, I had somebody some years ago who was kind of going home without getting all our notes done, and I'm like, well, you can't do that, because I can't close them if you don't finish what you're doing. And she's like, well, it doesn't, there's nothing here that says that I have to finish all my notes before I go home. Well, so now you have to put that in, your like bylaws. So yeah, it's like I thought that people understood that you can't go home until you're done, but no, apparently not. You have to literally write it down. So you have to literally write everything down. But I was also blessed to have so many years at Pitt that I, obviously kept a lot of that stuff, which helped me kind of, a little bit. But the process is very long. The meetings are spread apart. The hoops you have to jump through. And I just about missed it this year. It was like October, 21st or something. I got the thing saying that we were approved and that, the things closed on October 31st. So
congratulations, by the way.
yes, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, Pat. Well, one of the things that Joe and I do for all of our guests is we send you a Dean's Chat Cup. So we're going to send you a Dean's Chat Cup. And
Nice.
then we'd love to get you back on the show down the road for sure.
Yeah.
And so we appreciate your time and your expertise and your historical perspective. Just a fabulous hour discussion. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. It's I'm sure relatively boring for most people, but yeah. I thank you guys, and geez, I thank this whole profession, quite honestly. And we just absolutely have to get the word out about, I mean, how great it can be. The variety and the width and the whatever. I mean, there's just a lot that can be done, and it's been a very important part for my life. And teaching has been an important part. I know it's not for everybody, but really, spending time with young minds and helping kind of mold them. And I think it keeps me young. I still play paintball with those guys. I still feel exactly the same age. It's been a good life. So
absolutely, Joe. Last words.
No, thank you so much, Pat. We didn't even get through, like, I have a whole section where it's literally titled Expert Thought Leader in all these different fields that you are contributing. One that I just want to plug is, because I haven't seen this on anyone else's CV, that you're a section writer for Up to Date. So that's a pretty well-known, reputable source for reliable healthcare information. So again, just another testament to your expertise.
No, I appreciate it. And just kind of like a segue to that, I was the only DPM to speak at the ADA conference this year, which is really sad, quite honestly. About 15,000 people at that meeting, and to have like one DPM kind of talk, when we still have a lot of work to do there. And but yeah, the up to date is kind of fun. I have to keep it up to date, which means yearly I have to kind of go through it again, but it is kind of a neat little thing. Yep.
Yeah. So and that's only one of 9 bullet points that I pulled from your CV. Well, so we definitely will need a part 2.
I'm definitely a little bit of a blowhard for sure. So I suck up a lot of time. You could probably edit all that down to, just a few minutes.
No, it was the best. Appreciate it. To all of our listeners out there, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to give us a 5-star rating. And Joe and I have been talking lately. We really want some comments, some feedback on our guests and our show. And if you're watching on YouTube, by all means, become a subscriber. And until next week, everybody, cheers.